Okay, so as we dive into Module 6, we're going to talk about the 8 key factors of property investment strategy. Buying for income, buying for appreciation, push versus pull appreciation, trading up. You know, it's amazing how quickly people can create wealth and bigger portfolios and control more real estate by trading up. We're going to talk about buying and holding forever, or at least 27 and a half years. We're going to talk about refi till you die, the refinance accelerator philosophy. We're going to talk about managing your property manager, and we're going to talk about self-management of your properties. So let's jump in. Module 6, here we go. Welcome back to another amazing lesson. This is Jason Hartman, and today we're going to talk about buying for income and the concept that cash is king. You've all heard that old saying before, and as we dive into this lesson, it will become more and more apparent. So our learning objectives are, we will learn the factors that drive cash flow for properties, the advantages of investing for cash flow, and the disadvantages of that as well. And as we dive into this, let's look at some of the factors that really drive cash flow. You know, it's been said that happiness is a good cash flow. And I would agree completely. One of the things that we're going to discover in this lesson is the difference in reliability of cash flow versus appreciation. So the tenant base that isn't transitioning to homeownership is where a lot of investors have done very well, serving these people that will likely be long-term renters and that need rental property. We can fulfill this demand in this market because these are not the more upwardly mobile types that tend to buy. They may buy at some point in their life or they may not, but a lot of them are just happy as can be as renters, as tenants. And when an area has a large pool of tenants who rent for a long time, of course, this is going to be a good rental market, right? Because there will be a certain supply of rental properties and a large base of tenants. One of the things that we look for as we look around the country in different markets to invest is we like areas that have some degree of either transient. I know most people would think, I don't want transient stuff, but think about it. One of our markets, and a market that I own properties in, is Houston, Texas. And Houston right now, you know, you got to watch out for the oil prices and so forth at the time of this recording. But overall, that is an example of a market with a fairly transient population. Why is that? Well, people come in to work in the oil industry for a couple of years at a time, or they come in to work in the medical field or get trained in the medical field. It's a big medical area as well, for a couple years at a time, and they're not likely to buy a property. They think, if I'm only going to be here 1, 2, maybe 3 years, it's not appropriate to buy a home. It's better to rent. The other type of area is the blue-collar area. And the market, now there are many examples, by the way, besides the ones I mentioned, okay? But the market I'm going to use as my example for that is another area where I own properties, and an area that my company has done a lot of business in, and that's Memphis, Tennessee. Some people kind of joke about Memphis and they say, I love investing in Memphis because it's a blue-collar city where everybody earns $40,000 a year. Well, of course, not everybody, but that's just kind of a saying that I've heard from investors in the Memphis area. So when it's difficult for tenants to become homeowners because of maybe stringent lending standards, high interest rates, or whatever that obstacle is, maybe it's just another obstacle that I talk about that I call financial immaturity. Financial immaturity, where people won't save and they won't delay gratification, which is what it takes many times to become a homeowner, so they will just continue to rent. Now, when the job base in an area is predominantly blue collar, like we talked about Memphis, that tends to support a good renter population. So cash flow markets tend to be under the radar. These aren't markets that are making national headlines. Why is that? Because they typically are linear in nature, not cyclical, and they don't have that exciting, crazy, newsworthy roller coaster ride where the prices go up and down. And they can be fantastic investor markets. They can have fantastic cash flow, great renters, and just a good, stable, long-term investment, but they're not going to make the headlines. So what are some of the advantages of these markets? Well, greater stability. Cash flow is pretty darn reliable. Appreciation is pretty unpredictable. And tenant pays the mortgage because your rents will typically cover your mortgage plus give you some positive cash flow. And of course, that varies by market conditions. But at the time of this recording, a typical property that's fully leveraged might generate about $200 per month in positive cash flow with very little money down, with a lot of leverage, very little money into it. So we're exploiting the Archimedes idea, right? Give me a lever long enough and I will move the entire world. Was a great quote from him. So the tenant pays the mortgage and a greater depreciation tax deduction. Now, depreciation, sometimes it sounds like a bad thing, but it's really a great thing when we're talking about tax deductions because it gives you a much better write-off on your property. And depreciation is really the holy grail of tax write-offs. It's the best tax write-off going because it's a non-cash or a phantom write-off. And then staying power. The renters pay the mortgage for you. So the market could dip, the prices could go down, but as long as you can maintain your income, you will have a very good result from these cash flow, linear, boring, non-headline making markets. So investing for cash flow, much greater stability, and the return comes from the rental income, not the appreciation. Although you're likely to have a little bit of appreciation there too, so it doesn't mean you can't have appreciation. It's just usually not that home run type of appreciation. And you can wait out the dips because you have what I like to call a sustainable investment. Now, the disadvantages. It's not all good. There's some bad things too. You don't get this crazy price appreciation, which can really make you a lot of money. You need a long-term time horizon. And when I say long-term, I mean at least 3 to 5 years, hopefully longer. I recommend that people keep their properties generally for, get this one, 27.5 years. Well, why would I say that? Because that is the depreciation schedule on our humble little single-family home. So single-family homes have the short depreciation schedule, and they really offer a very nice long-term investment in these cash flow linear markets. They have less advantage from leverage. Well, why is that? Because you can still put very little money into the property, but when the prices aren't appreciating by crazy numbers like 20, 25, or 30% annually, then that leverage doesn't do as much for you as it does in those crazy markets that are the cyclical markets. But of course, like the old saying goes, what goes up must always come down. And we've certainly seen that happen in the cyclical markets. It happens every cycle. It happens all the time. People are riding the high and they love it, and then they get wiped out during the downturn. So, that's the way it goes in the cyclical markets. So the leverage doesn't give you as much of an advantage because it's just not that exciting roller coaster ride that you have in the cyclical markets. The properties can take a little longer to sell because in these markets, you have a lot of renters who aren't really moving into the home ownership market. And if they're not moving into that market, well, what does that mean? There's a smaller pool of buyers. You do have some home buyers that are owner occupants, and you do have a lot of investors who have now seemingly discovered these fantastic cash flow markets. But again, you don't have that mix of the speculator type investors that you do in the cyclical markets and all of the homeowners that are just trying to buy their own home. So they don't experience these home run returns, but they don't experience the ugly, terrible losses either. So what are some of our key points before we get to our badge action? Cash flow markets are defined by their tenant base. If you have a lot of renters in a market, that is generally a good indicator of it being a cash flow market. The tenant base tends to rent for a long time because they have this sort of blue-collar mentality, and they have blue-collar type employment, and maybe lenders, depending on what time it is in the cycle of the lending cycle. By the way, that's another part of the real estate cycle, the lending cycle. And I'll just give you an example of that for a quick moment. Before the Great Recession in 2003, 2004, and into 2005 a little bit, you saw lenders being very liberal, really some would say, including yours truly, would say stupid in their lending standards, where they were giving a loan to anybody. You know, if you had a pulse, you could fog a mirror with your breath, meaning you could get a loan. That was really silly. It was stupid, and obviously the chickens came home to roost, as the saying goes. And now what you saw after the Great Recession is you saw the pendulum swing the other way. I say too hard. I say that the lenders and the banks really overcorrected, and they went too far to the other extreme, and since then you've kind of seen things coming back. And I think we're still a little off-center where it's a little bit too hard to get a loan now, but gosh, please, let's not have that easy, crazy time again, okay? So that influences the tenant base and whether or not they will become home buyers very significantly. These markets require patience. They are for long-term, prudent investors who just want to get a good return on their investment. The key advantages, of course, is the stability. You have nice, stable returns, and you have much greater potential tax benefits from that wonderful, incredible, best tax write-off in the world known as depreciation, because your land to improvement, as I call it, the LTI ratio, is very favorable to give you more of a tax benefit from depreciation. So your ROI will not be as incredible during those crazy up cycles, but you won't lose your shirt during the down cycle either. These are nice, reliable, prudent markets for good conservative investors. So cash is king. What are our action items? Describe a few key advantages of buying investment property for income, not appreciation. And the badge action, use the template, write out your conclusions, and then upload a screenshot for your badge. And I'll look forward to talking with you on the next lesson.